The phone was already ringing when I signed the termination papers, its tone sharp, metallic cut through the polished quiet of the conference room. The caller ID flashed one word that made every muscle in me tighten. Pentagon. Across the table, Graham West, our CEO, was still smiling, watching me sign away 17 years of my life. "We're streamlining operations," he said, his voice smooth as the cufflinks on his wrists. I capped my pen, slid the papers back to him, and watched that smile fade as the phone kept ringing. He frowned, irritated. "They'll leave a message." "They won't," I said. He hesitated, then hit speaker. "Mr. West, Colonel Ellis, Department of Defense Procurement," came the clipped voice. "We received notice that Evelyn Rourke has been removed as Savannah Dynamics Certified Liaison. Please confirm her replacement's security clearance and Pentagon approval." Graham blinked. "Her replacement?" "Yes, sir. Until certification is verified. All classified contracts are suspended, effective immediately." There was a small, dry click as the line disconnected. The sound landed harder than any shout. The air in the room changed like pressure dropping before a storm. Graham's complexion went from polished tan to paper white. Behind him, the skyline of Savannah shimmered through the windows, the heat outside pressing in on the glass. I leaned forward, resting one hand on the binder that had sat beside me the entire meeting, worn leather, corners creased from years of use. Inside it were the signatures, clauses, and approvals that kept this company compliant, solvent, alive. "You might want to open Section 12C, I said softly. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me. What's in 12C? "The clause I wrote in 2015 after your last efficiency stunt," I said. "Any change in certified personnel without 120 days' notice triggers automatic suspension and a $550,000 daily penalty until reinstated." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I closed the binder, tucked it under my arm, and stood. "You just turned cost-cutting into bankruptcy?" "Graham." Then I walked out, leaving him staring at the phone still lit, still silent, still counting. The first time I walked through the gates of Savannah Dynamics. I was 32, a Navy logistics officer newly turned civilian, still standing too straight for the private sector. The air inside the plant smelled of oil, heat, and precision. Rows of machines breathed in steady rhythm, cutting and shaping the parts that would someday hold together armored vehicles. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. I could feel that from day one. I started at the bottom inventory control counting bolts and verifying supplier certifications until my eyes blurred. But I liked the order of it, the way numbers told the truth when people didn't. Within 3 years, I was running compliance audits. Within 5, the Pentagon trusted my reports more than some of their own contractors. There were nights when I slept in my office chair, tracing procurement chains across continents to make sure no component came from an unapproved source. My colleagues used to joke that my binder weighed more than a rifle. They weren't wrong. In 2015, a supplier tried to slip through a batch of uncertified alloy for vehicle armor. If it had reached production, it could have fractured under live fire. I caught it 2 hours before shipment, that night. Sitting alone in the break room, I rewrote every section of our defense contracts, line by line. That was when Clause 12C was born, our safeguard against shortcuts and carelessness. The penalty clause wasn't vengeance. It was protection for our soldiers, for our credibility, for the quiet integrity this place once had. Over the years, I watched people come and go. Engineers aged out, young managers cycled in, and the board traded loyalty for buzzwords like optimization and synergy. Through it all, I stayed. Not because I needed the job, but because I believed in the work, the kind that never made headlines but kept people alive overseas. 17 years of diligence, trust, and silence. 17 years spent holding the line while others looked for ways around it. And now, the same rules I wrote to save this company were the ones about to test whether it deserved saving at all. By the time Lucas Crane arrived, the factory didn't sound the same. The rhythm I'd known for years, steady, sure. Almost human was replaced by silence in corners where machines once ran. He came from Boston, 38, full of credentials and confidence. The board called him a modernizer. To me, he looked like a man who'd never worn safety goggles or smelled coolant on his hands. On his first day, he called it restructuring. On the second, streamlining. By the third, the word had started to taste like rust in my mouth. He'd walk into meetings with his tablet full of charts, productivity curves, cost curves, projections that only existed in his head. "See here," he'd say, tapping the screen. "Redundancy across oversight teams. 2 sets of compliance checks doing the same work." I told him they weren't redundant. One ensured mechanical tolerances, the other verified regulatory certifications. Lose one. You lose traceability. I explained. He smiled that consultant's smile. "That's an outdated model." "Evelyn, the future is lean." Graham West, ever eager to impress the board, nodded along like a student desperate for approval. "We trust Lucas's judgment," he told me one afternoon. "You've built a solid foundation. Now it's time to evolve." I watched him sign the approval memo, the same pen that would later sign my termination. When HR called me in on a Monday morning, I already knew what was coming. The language was soft, rehearsed reorganization, operational efficiency, legacy roles phased out. I sat through it without interrupting. They expected anger, they got silence. As they handed me the folder, I rested my hand on the binder beside me. 17 years of policies, signatures, and certifications, all documented, all precise. Inside it, on top of the final section, lay my updated liaison certification, approved by the Pentagon just 2 months earlier. My name, Evelyn M. Rourke, listed as the sole authorized contact for every classified defense contract Savannah Dynamics held. I thanked them for their time, stood, and tucked the binder under my arm. The weight of it was familiar, steady. I didn't need to raise my voice. The papers inside would do that for me soon enough. By late afternoon, the headlines began to crawl across the news ticker. Pentagon suspends Savannah Dynamics classified contracts pending compliance review. I was home by then, sitting at the small kitchen table that overlooked the Savannah River, where cargo ships moved slowly under the orange tilt of sunset. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the low murmur of the television. My phone buzzed non-stop, unknown numbers, company extensions, board assistants I hadn't heard from in years. I let every call go to voicemail. The anchor on the screen looked grave. Sources confirm 3 active defense projects totaling approximately $180 million have been halted following the company's failure to provide certified liaison documentation. Each day of non-compliance could result in penalties exceeding $550,000. I stirred my coffee and took a sip. It was still hot, slightly bitter, exactly how I liked it. Somewhere across town, in a boardroom that still smelled of lemon polish and panic, Graham West was realizing what those 6 paragraphs of fine print truly meant. Section 12(c) wasn't a technicality, it was a tripwire. Any change in certified personnel without 120 days' notice triggered an automatic suspension. I'd drafted it myself, line by line, after that near disaster a decade earlier. Now the clause was alive, moving through the company's veins like an electrical surge. Production froze, deliveries halted, contractors locked down secure files. Every department that had once called my diligence bureaucratic drag was now begging for the stability they'd dismissed. I walked to the window and watched the light fade over the water. I thought of the machinists still working double shifts, the engineers who'd trusted leadership to protect their work, the soldiers whose safety depended on our precision. This wasn't revenge. It was the system doing what it was designed to do, protect integrity when people failed too. The phone rang again. This time, I picked it up, listened to the silence on the other end, then set it down without a word. The night outside was calm. Inside the company, the clock had just started counting. The call came just after midnight. The house was dark except for the blue glow of my laptop, the news feed still looping the same headlines. I didn't need to check the caller ID, Only one person had the nerve or the desperation to dial me at that hour. "Evelyn," Graham's voice rasped through the line. It sounded smaller than I remembered. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch. The faint sound of the river outside filled the space between us. "The Pentagon's initiated a full compliance review," he continued. "All 3 projects are frozen. Procurement's demanding documentation we can't provide. Our suppliers have locked their shipments. Our production line is down, and the board's calling emergency sessions every hour. We're hemorrhaging money. Evelyn, $550,000 a day." "You knew that clause existed," I said quietly. "You signed it yourself in 2015. I thought it was precautionary," he muttered. "No one imagined that you'd trigger it." He didn't answer. I heard the shuffle of papers, the tired exhale of a man surrounded by smoke without a fire extinguisher. "Look," he said finally, "we need you back. You're the only one who can restore compliance. Tell me what it'll take." I stood by the window, watching the reflection of the city lights shimmer on the river. For years, I'd served under promises of loyalty, of recognition that never came. Now the same voices that dismissed me wanted my steadiness to save them. "I'll return," I said, "but not as operations manager, as chief manufacturing officer, reporting directly to the board, full control over all defense contracts and compliance oversight." Graham hesitated, and Lucas gone by Monday morning. The line went silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the math, the politics, the bruised ego. "Finally," he spoke. "The board will need to vote. Then call a meeting." He exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between defeat and relief. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. I never am." When the call ended, I closed the laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out at the still water. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. Saturday mornings used to mean coffee on the porch and the slow roll of barges down the river. That morning, I drove downtown instead, the streets still half asleep under the low Savannah fog. The headquarters tower glinted pale in the early light glass and steel, trying to look invincible. Inside, the air was sharp with disinfectant and tension. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes as she led me toward the top-floor conference room. I could already hear the low voices through the glass wall, men arguing numbers, risk, and blame. When I stepped in, the room fell silent. Graham West stood by the window, jaw tight, eyes rimmed with fatigue. Lucas Crane sat at the far end of the table, his phone face down, fingers tapping restlessly. Beside him, Alan Pierce, the company's general counsel, stacked a pile of folders. "Thank you for coming, Evelyn," Graham began, his tone halfway between apology and command. I placed my binder on the table. "You called the meeting. Let's get to it." Alan cleared his throat. "The issue is Section 12C of our defense contracts. We're seeking clarification, specifically the scope of penalties and path to reinstatement." I opened the binder, sliding the signed pages forward. "Section 12C requires a certified liaison for all classified projects. Termination or reassignment without 120 days' notice triggers automatic suspension and fines $550,000 per day." The clause was approved by the Department of Defense and built into every contract since 2016. There is no override, no waiver. Alan scanned the document, his expression tightening. "It's airtight," he said quietly. The Pentagon acted within their rights. The board members murmured among themselves, realization spreading like a chill through the room. I looked at Graham. "You don't have a compliance officer. You don't have certification. You don't have access to half your active contracts. You need immediate reinstatement of authority and a signature from someone the Pentagon already trusts." No one argued. The vote was unanimous. Alan reached for his pen. Effective immediately. Evelyn Rourke, Chief Manufacturing Officer, reporting directly to the board. Across the table, 2 security officers entered. Lucas's chair scraped the floor as they stopped beside him. I closed my binder. The sound echoed like a gavel. By Monday morning, the plant was running on half its heartbeat. Machines idled mid-cycle. Cranes hung still over pallets of half-finished components. The smell of metal and solvent filled the air, a scent I'd always found reassuring. Until now. I walked the length of the floor with Tomas Delgado, head of quality control, a quiet man who'd been with the company nearly as long as I had. He handed me a stack of reports as we passed the assembly lines. "These are the procurement changes under Crane's efficiency plan," he said. "New suppliers, new materials." He approved them all. I flipped through the pages. Some of the vendors were unfamiliar names that didn't appear on the Defense Department's approved list. One, from Malaysia, had no domestic certification at all. "Where's this shipment now?" I asked. "Dock 3, Tomas said. "Came in last week. We haven't touched it since the suspension." We walked there in silence. The steel lay stacked in neat bundles, stamped with heat numbers that meant nothing to me. I ran my hand over one cold, rougher than it should have been. Tomas handed me a report. "We ran a surface test this morning. Wrong alloy. We're looking at structural integrity 30% below spec. If this had gone into armor plating..." He stopped himself, eyes flicking toward the workers nearby. "It didn't need finishing." We both knew what it meant. I closed the folder, pulse steady but rising. I'd spent 17 years building systems to prevent exactly this, and in 8 months, one man's ambition had come close to undoing it all. "Shut it down," I said. "Every line tied to these suppliers. I want a full compliance suite: materials, vendors, documentation, everything. Nothing moves until I sign off." Tomas nodded and reached for his radio. The order rippled through the floor, a sudden stillness, followed by the clatter of switches being thrown, conveyor belts grinding to a halt. I looked around the silent factory. The hum of production replaced by the weight of what almost happened. Efficiency had nearly cost lives, and this time, silence would not protect anyone. 3 days later, the factory floor looked different. Not because of paint or lighting, but because the tension had shifted, focused now, sharpened. Every worker knew why they were there, why every checklist mattered. The sound of the machines felt purposeful again, almost proud. At 9 sharp, a convoy of black sedans rolled through the gates. Colonel James Whitaker, Department of Defense Procurement, stepped out. First, a tall man with weathered hands and eyes that noticed everything. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "Ms. Rourke," he said, "we're here to verify reinstatement of your classified status. I hope you're ready for a long day." "I've been ready for weeks," I said. We started on the production floor, safety goggles and ear protection in place. The colonel examined everything: the calibration tags, the welding logs, even the temperature records for the heat treatment ovens. Workers straightened when he passed, and I saw something I hadn't in months: quiet confidence. They weren't afraid of inspection. They were proud of it. At the testing station, I handed him a folder marked Restoration Protocols. "We've replaced all foreign-sourced materials, reinstated domestic suppliers, and revalidated every certification. Our QC teams are running double shifts to reinspect everything Lucas Crane altered." Whitaker flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. "Comprehensive," he murmured. "You've turned this around fast." "Fast wasn't the goal," I said. "Correct was." He looked up, meeting my eyes for a long moment before continuing the walkthrough. By noon, we'd covered every section of the plant. He asked questions. My people answered them without hesitation. When we reached the end of the assembly line, he paused beside a completed armor panel gleaming under the overhead lights. "This," he said, running his hand across the steel, "is what continuity looks like. The Pentagon values consistency more than anything. Keep this up, and you'll be hearing from us soon about something bigger." How big, I asked, though I already sensed the weight in his tone. He smiled faintly. "Advanced armor systems. 3 years, around 150 million. As he walked toward the exit, I looked back at the line of workers watching from behind the glass. For the first time in months, they didn't look worried. They looked ready. The contract ceremony took place in the same glass conference room where I'd been fired 6 weeks earlier. The long table was polished, the air faintly scented with lemon oil, and the skyline of Savannah burned gold through the windows. But this time, there were no buzzwords or presentation slides, just quiet anticipation and the rustle of documents waiting to be signed. Graham West stood at the head of the table, his expression carefully composed. "Before we begin," he said, glancing at the gathered executives and a few reporters, "I want to acknowledge the person who made this possible. Without her expertise and leadership, Savannah Dynamics would not be standing here today." He turned toward me. "Evelyn, you saved this company." Applause followed, measured, professional, but I could see something unguarded flicker behind Graham's practiced smile. Guilt. Maybe. Or recognition of a debt that would never quite be repaid. I nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. West. Let's make sure what we build from here deserves the effort it took to save it." Pens scratched paper. The contract, 3 years, $150 million, was sealed before noon. Outside the room, the plant floor vibrated with the sound of production starting again. As the others filtered out, Mara Collins, our former HR director, lingered by the doorway. She looked smaller than I remembered, her voice low. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I knew the termination was wrong. I should have spoken up. But you didn't." I finished gently. She nodded. I told myself it wasn't my place. It was easier that way. "It usually is," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the city filled the silence between us. When she finally met my eyes, I smiled, not out of kindness, but out of release. "It's done, Mara." We both learned something from it. Downstairs, the factory roared back to life, machines steady, voices sure. The rhythm I'd missed for months returned, not as background noise, but as proof that the heart of the company was beating again. And this time, it was stronger than ever. Night settled softly over the river, a slow amber glow stretching across the water. From my office window, the factory lights shimmered like constellations, rows of steel, motion, and human focus. The hum of the machines below was steady again, the same rhythm that had guided 17 years of my life. I sat at my desk, the binder open in front of me. Its leather was worn smooth now, the edges frayed from 1,000 hands that had never held it with enough care. On the cover, I'd added a new label, Continuity and Lessons Learned. Inside, the pages carried every crisis, every near miss, every name worth remembering. Clause 12C had its own tab, the paper still bearing faint creases from the day I'd first written it. I turned to the final page and uncapped my pen. "Experience is not an inefficiency," I wrote, my handwriting firm and even, "It's our only safeguard." For a moment, I let my hand rest there, ink drying beneath my fingers. This company had broken my trust, but not my conviction. The systems I built had outlasted ego and short-term thinking. They had done what they were meant to do, protect the people who worked with purpose and the soldiers who relied on what we made. A soft knock at the door pulled me back. It was Thomas Delgado, holding a clipboard. "Last of the test reports," he said, all within spec. "We're clear to start the new armor line tomorrow." I took the folder and smiled. "Good work. Tomas, go home. You've earned some rest." He hesitated. "So have you." When he left, I looked once more at the floor below. Sparks flickered from the welding bays like fireflies in motion. The sound rose up through the glass, clean, precise, alive. I closed the binder, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. It wasn't a record anymore. It was a promise. Tomorrow, the lights would stay on, and this time, everyone would know who kept them burning.